Welcome back to Tell Me More Stories Told as podcast. Today, we're going to take a journey back in time, back to 1890, to a place called Wounded Knee. It's a story that's, well, heartbreaking, but it's also essential to understanding, the history of the American West.
When we're talking about Wounded Knee, it's easy to just get caught up in the tragic events of that one day. But what's really fascinating, I think, is how this event, it's really like a culmination of decades of this tension, decades of misunderstanding between the U.S. government and the Lakota people.
Okay, so let's rewind a bit. For those listening, can you paint a picture of what life was like for the Lakota, before the events leading up to Wounded Knee?
Sure, the Lakota were nomadic people, deeply connected to the Great Plains. Their lives revolved around the buffalo, which, provided them with everything: food, clothing, shelter, and even a spiritual connection to the land. But as more settlers pushed westward, driven by this idea of manifest destiny, well, their way of life was increasingly under threat.
And this clash of cultures, this competition for land and resources, that's really at the heart of the story, right?
Absolutely. You see, for the Lakota, the buffalo wasn't just an animal, it was sacred. But the settlers, they saw it as a resource to be exploited. And, they hunted the buffalo nearly to extinction. And this ecological devastation, well, it had a profound impact on the Lakota, both physically and spiritually.
Yeah, it's almost unimaginable to have your entire way of life, your cultural identity, threatened in such a fundamental way.
Yeah, and it's in this context of loss and desperation that a new spiritual movement kind of emerges among the Lakota, the ghost dance.
Ah, yes, the ghost dance. I remember reading about this. It was a peaceful movement, right? A way for the Lakota to connect with their ancestors and to pray for a better future.
Exactly. The ghost dance, well, it was based on the visions of this Paiute prophet named Wavaka. He preached this message of peace and unity, promising that if the Lakota performed this dance and wore these special ghost shirts, a new world would come, where the buffalo would return and the white man would disappear.
It sounds almost apocalyptic, but it's important to remember that for the Lakota, this wasn't about violence. It was about hope, about restoring their lost world.
Precisely. But the U.S. government, already fearful of Native American resistance, well, they saw the ghost dance as a threat. They viewed it as a sign of, a potential uprising, a rejection of assimilation.
So we have this underlying tension, this fear on the part of the government. And then enters Sitting Bull, this legendary Lakota leader who becomes a focal point for this growing unrest.
Sitting Bull was a powerful symbol of Lakota resistance. He had been a key figure in the Battle of Little Bighorn, where Custer and his troops were defeated. And when the ghost dance movement gained momentum, well, Sitting Bull embraced it, which further alarmed the authorities.
And that alarm led to a fatal confrontation, didn't it?
Yes. The Indian agent at Standing Rock, fearing Sitting Bull's influence, ordered his arrest. During the arrest, a struggle kind of ensued, and Sitting Bull was shot and killed.
His death must have sent shockwaves through the Lakota community.
Absolutely, it was a devastating blow, and it further heightened the tension between the Lakota and the government. Fearful of reprisals, about 200 members of Sitting Bull's band fled Standing Rock, and they joined another Lakota leader, Chief Spotted Elk, at the Cheyenne River Reservation.
Spotted Elk, also known as Bigfoot. He was facing an impossible situation, wasn't he? His people were grieving, resources were scarce, and the U.S. Army was increasing its presence on the reservations.
You're right, he was caught between a rock and a hard place, and in a desperate attempt to find safety for his people, Spotted Elk decided to lead them to Pine Ridge Reservation, hoping to find refuge with Red Cloud, another prominent Lakota leader.
So begins their long and arduous journey to Pine Ridge. In the heart of winter, imagine traveling hundreds of miles with limited supplies, many of your people sick and weakened.
And along this journey, they encounter a detachment of the 7th Cavalry.
The same 7th Cavalry that had fought at Little Bighorn, the one that Custer had led.
The very same, though under different leaders by this point. And among the soldiers was this scout named John Shangro, who was half Lakota himself. He understood Lakota culture and could sense the fear and desperation among Spotted Elk's band.
And Shangro tried to warn the soldiers, didn't he? He advised against disarming Spotted Elk's band, predicting it would lead to violence.
He did, but his warnings fell on deaf ears. The soldiers, fueled by their own fears and mistrust, ignored Shangro's advice. They escorted Spotted Elk's band to a place called Wounded Knee Creek and ordered them to make camp.
This is where the story takes a truly tragic turn. We have this weary and vulnerable group of Lakota, surrounded by a heavily armed military force. And before we delve into the events that unfolded at Wounded Knee Creek, let me just remind you to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the rest of this gripping story. We'll be right back to continue our deep dive into the Wounded Knee Massacre.
So we left off with Spotted Elk's band, right, encamped at Wounded Knee Creek, surrounded by the 7th Cavalry. Just to map on the scene for a second. Teepus set against, this backdrop of snow-covered plain, and the Lakota weary from their journey, the soldiers on edge, their rifles glinting in the winter sun, the tension, it must have been palpable.
Yeah, it's a scene ripe for misunderstanding, for a single spark to ignite a tragedy. And that spark, sadly, wasn't long in coming.
No, it wasn't. On the morning of December 29th, Colonel James Forsyth, the command of the 7th Cavalry, he arrives at Wounded Knee and orders the disarmament of the Lakota. Now remember, many of these Lakota had already surrendered some weapons to the soldiers who escorted them to Wounded Knee, but Forsyth wanted everything. Every rifle, every knife.
From the Lakota perspective, this demand must have felt like a final insult, right? A stripping away of their last vestiges of dignity and self-reliance.
Oh, absolutely. You can imagine the resentment and fear this caused. Some Lakota, already deeply distrustful of the soldiers, were hesitant to comply. And, in this atmosphere of heightened tension, a deaf Lakota man named Black Coyote refused to give up his rifle.
Now, Black Coyote's story is particularly poignant. As you know, some accounts suggest he was clinging to his rifle because it was new and valuable to him. Others say he simply didn't understand the soldiers' commands because of his deafness.
Regardless of the reason, this moment becomes a focal point, a flashpoint in a powder keg. As soldiers try to wrestle the rifle away from Black Coyote, a shot rings out. Whether it was accidental or intentional is still debated today, but the consequences, well, they were immediate and catastrophic.
Yeah, the soldiers, already on high alert, they opened fire on the Lakota. And it wasn't just random shooting either. They used Hotchkiss guns, these rapid-fire weapons, capable of unleashing just a torrent of bullets.
Yeah, these Hotchkiss guns weren't your typical cavalry rifles. They were heavy-duty weapons, more suited for mowing down enemy ranks than subduing a group that included women and children. It's a detail that really highlights the imbalance of power and the brutality that was about to unfold.
And remember, many of the Lakota were already disarmed, caught completely off guard by the sudden eruption of gunfire. Some tried to fight back, but they were hopelessly outnumbered and outgunned.
The scene just descends into chaos, women and children screaming and fleeing the camp, seeking shelter in this nearby ravine, desperately trying to escape the hail of bullets.
It's a horrifying image to imagine. Innocent people, caught in the crossfire, their lives snuffed out in an instant. It makes you wonder how the soldiers could have justified such indiscriminate killing.
And that's a question that continues to haunt us. There are accounts of Lakota being chased for miles across the frozen prairie, shot down as they tried to surrender. It wasn't just a battle, it was a massacre.
Within an hour, it was over. The snow was stained red with blood, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder and death. Over 150 Lakota men, women, and children lay dead or dying. Some estimates placed the death toll even higher, closer to 300.
Even the U.S. Army suffered casualties, 25 soldiers killed, many likely by friendly fire, a testament to the just chaotic and indiscriminate nature of the attack.
The aftermath is just as grim. A mass grave was dug on a hill overlooking the massacre site. This stark reminder of the lives lost that day. 4 infants were found alive, miraculously sheltered from the carnage, but for most, there was only grief and despair.
The massacre sparked outrage across the country. General Nelson Miles, who had previously criticized the government's treatment of Native Americans, condemned the actions of the 7th Cavalry. He relieved Forsyth of command and criticized his tactical decisions, arguing that the whole situation could have been handled differently.
But despite Miles' condemnation, Forsyth was later reinstated by the Secretary of War. A court of inquiry, while critical of some of Forsyth's actions, ultimately didn't hold him responsible for the massacre.
And that lack of accountability is something that continues to fuel anger and resentment among the Lakota today. How can we reconcile the differing perspectives on what happened at Wounded Knee and who was ultimately responsible?
It's a question that challenges us to think critically about history, to acknowledge the complexity of events and the often blurred lines between perpetrator and victim.
And as we delve deeper into the legacy of Wounded Knee, we'll see how this event continues to shape the relationship between Native Americans and the U.S. government to this day.
So we've talked about the events leading up to the massacre, the chaos and brutality of that day, and the lack of accountability in the aftermath. But I kind of want to shift our focus to the legacy of Wounded Knee. It's not just a historical event, it's a wound that continues to resonate in Lakota communities, even today.
Right. Wounded Knee isn't just this tragic event of the past, you know? It's really a symbol, I think, of this ongoing struggle for Native American rights and recognition. The memory of the massacre serves as a powerful reminder of the injustices that Native people have faced throughout history. It's a story that's been passed down through generations, really shaping their identity and their relationship with the U.S. government.
That brings us to Dee Brown's book, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. It was published in 1970. And it brought the story of Wounded Knee and the broader history of Native American oppression to, well, a much wider audience.
Brown's book wasn't just a historical account, it was a cultural touchstone. The title itself, which was taken from a line in a Stephen Vincent Benet poem, became this poignant and widely recognized phrase, symbolizing the tragedy and the loss at Wounded Knee. It's been used in music and film and literature, really ensuring that the memory of this event remains in the public consciousness.
So Wounded Knee is more than a historical footnote. It's a cultural touchstone, a symbol of injustice, and even a call for reconciliation. But there's this other aspect of Wounded Knee I find really interesting. It involves this tangible piece of history, a ghost shirt.
Oh yeah, this is where the story takes this kind of unexpected turn. You see, a ghost shirt, which is believed to have been worn by someone at Wounded Knee, ended up in a museum in Glasgow, Scotland. It was brought there by this Lakota interpreter named George Krager, who toured with Buffalo Bill's Wild West show.
Wow. Imagine that journey, this sacred object, imbued with the hopes and dreams of the ghost dance movement, traveling across the ocean far from its origins.
It really is. It's a remarkable story of cultural exchange, but also, I think, a reminder of the exploitation that was often inherent in these Wild West shows. Native Americans were often portrayed as these exotic curiosities, their cultures commodified for entertainment.
It makes you think about the power of objects, how they can embody entire histories, and connect us to the past in such profound ways. So what happened to the ghost shirt after it arrived in Glasgow?
Well, it remained in the museum's collection for over a century, kind of like a silent witness to this tragic chapter in history. But then in 1998, something really incredible happened. The ghost shirt was returned to the Wounded Knee Survivors Association.
Oh wow, that must have been a powerful moment. A symbol of healing and reconciliation.
It was. The repatriation of the ghost shirt was like a recognition of the Lakota's cultural heritage and this step towards acknowledging, the injustices of the past. And it also highlighted the importance of museums and cultural institutions in addressing issues of repatriation and cultural sensitivity.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the Wounded Knee Massacre, I want to encourage you all to reflect on the complexities of this event. It's a story of cultural clashes, government overreach, and the just tragic consequences of fear and misunderstanding. But it's also a story of resilience, of cultural survival, and this ongoing fight for justice and recognition.
It's a reminder that history isn't just a collection of facts and dates. It's this living tapestry woven with human experiences, both triumphant and tragic. And by understanding the past, well, we can gain insights into the present and work towards creating a more just and equitable future for everyone.
Thank you for joining us on this journey back in time to Wounded Knee. I hope it sparked your curiosity to learn more about this pivotal event and its enduring legacy. And remember, there are countless other stories waiting to be told, waiting to shed light on the complexities of our shared human experience. So stay curious, keep exploring, and tell me more.